All right. Well, we hit 8 o'clock, so I think we'll get started on what is the final panel for this year's DC International Shorts Festival. The question is the title of the panel, and it's this: where is this going? And that's a major question. When I talked to Joe about did I want to be involved with moderating the sort of future-looking panel to the future of filmmaking, it's something I'm so curious about that, I think it's going to be good to have a conversation about it and see where that might take us. My name's Todd Raviotta, and I'm a film teacher in Richmond, Virginia. I teach at Maggie Walker Governor School and at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and I had done film school at VCU where I met Joe and made a whole bunch of work in the early part of the 21st century. And the technology of the possibilities of digital video and going out of celluloid film, when I was in film school, doing 16 millimeter and then going straight into digital video was the moment I think that the future kind of started. And I did want to start with kind of having y'all introduce yourselves briefly, but what was the thing that kind of got you into filmmaking? If we start where we began, like what was the spark that got us in love with cinema and filmmaking, then we might be able to rap about where the future is. So I think what is that film movement or that moment that made you say, I want to make films? And we can start with Philip on the end. And come on down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Phil Cook. My dad had an 8 millimeter movie camera, and it was a pretty sophisticated camera from the 60s. And I knew he had it, and he stopped using it for a while, and I used to sneak it out and shoot film, 8 millimeter film. Really elaborate little things because I was sort of into visual effects. And started on 8 millimeter film, moved on to 16 millimeter film, eventually got a degree in film, became a cinematographer, shot a couple of 35 millimeter features, did a lot of work for music videos, and then over time transitioned into the digital world just out of practicality. So that's kind of it in a general nutshell.
And Michael?
Growing up in the 80s, I grew up in a small town, rural Virginia, in the southern border of North Carolina. Is this thing on? No?
Tap it.
Is there an on button?
It's an added mic, so it might not be mixed in just yet. Is that mic on?
Thank you.
My apologies, sir.
That's right. Let me rewind. So I'm from Emporia, Virginia, which is a rural town and small town. And so I didn't have access to a camera. Our family didn't have one. But growing up in the 80s, it was always, like the Spielberg, it was the James Bond movies. Those are the kind of the big films that I grew up on. And then it wasn't until I watched Pulp Fiction where I was like, whoa, boom. Like that's a movie that was kind of, to me, it was raw, it was different, it was refreshing in that way. And because of my teenage years, I really, took a liking to it. So, but it wasn't until, I just, maybe it was pessimism or maybe I was being realistic. I just didn't think that filmmaking was a future for me, at all. And so, I think my first taste of filmmaking was when Tim Reed opened New Millennium Studios in Petersburg, and then I was an extra in one of his movies. Of course, I got cut out because that's what happens. But I interned at the Virginia Film Office because I went to VCU for advertising because they didn't have a cinema program, a full-year cinema program at the time. Not that my parents would have allowed me to do that anyway, but so I interned at the film office, and then I ended up working in the art department on a couple of feature films while I was in college. And then when I graduated, the ad agencies weren't hiring. In fact, they were laying off hundreds at the time in Richmond. And so I started a newspaper career and was working on a copy desk. It's just I was seeing these dramatic photos coming in from the Associated Press and from my local photographers, and reading such really captivating stories that it kind of drew me back into. It gave me the confidence maybe that I could write, because even in school, even though I all my teachers said I should be an art director, I never really thought about being an art director, even though that's what I did all throughout high school. I thought that the real challenge was in writing, and so even today as a communications professional, it wasn't until 2011 that I got back into it, and the Virginia Production Alliance was a big part of that, and being able to network with people who were now using digital photography, videography, because it had just come such a long way. That it got me back into it, and then I started writing and filmmaking and everything like that since then. So that's my really long-winded story, now that my mic works.
Yeah, well, excellent. Thank you. And Vivian, where was your start?
So I am a writer by trade. I wrote poems and short stories and filled notebooks and notebooks that I am now finding in my parents' basement. And my dad is making me take them because he doesn't want them anymore. And I, very similar to Michael, I'm also an 80s child and grew up with Spielberg. And I remember that moment when I was sitting in the theater and I saw Jurassic Park and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And but also grew up and went into advertising. That's what I majored in college. I became a copywriter, worked at ad agencies, and wrote radio spots and websites and billboards and print ads. And when I sold my first commercial to a client and was able to go on set and see my words that I wrote on paper come to life in the actors, I was hooked. And that was it for me. And then I just started working my way towards how can I just do that and only that.
Excellent. And Jon?
Yeah, I'm Jon. I'm a cinematographer and director based out of Baltimore. And I think same thing for me. The first movie I saw was Jurassic Park. I was like 6 years old, and I was hooked from there. I was like, I don't know, like I barely remember the movie, but I remember seeing Steven Spielberg's name, pop up as directed by, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to make movies like that. So haven't had the luxury to make a movie like that yet, but I'm working towards it. But I've been working with my brother Matt, and we co-write, co-direct movies, and I think our first feature was a Blair Witch knockoff when we were 12 years old. Nice. But yeah, we've been working ever since. Make a lot of shorts, and currently work as a cinematographer for commercials in the Baltimore area. So,
excellent. Well, thank you for sharing the sort of starting points, the prologue. I'm also a kid of the 80s, and I remember E.T. and Empire Strikes Back. And, when I do the math, I'm like, I was 2 or 3, and I can remember being in the theater and the feeling of being in the theater. I grew up in New Orleans, and the way the movie theaters were there before stadium seating and the flat rows. And I just have those memories of being in the theater. What are your thoughts on where we are now, how people see movies, and again, as we start to say, where we're going? Do you think that that's changed? Like, do you think there are young people that are formulating their theater-going experiences, their movie-watching experiences to want to do this art form? Do you think that's changed since your sort of memory that got you into this? And
Well, all of you sort of cited Jurassic Park. I started out in classic visual effects where, things were done with stop motion puppets and matte paintings and glass paintings and all that stuff. And when Jurassic Park came out, it was an extinction event for us. Yeah. It's like, holy moly, you're making dinosaurs with a computer? It was completely intimidating. And all the guys that we worked with was like, man, that's it. It's over, right? So, but I taught myself computer animation as a result of that. So rather than see it as an extinction event, it was an adaptation event. And throughout my career, and probably all of yours as well, technology has always driven this industry. I mean, going back to silent, 16 frames per second film, to color, to talkies, to television, to VHS, to DVD, to Netflix, to streaming, to AI-generated imagery. This has always been an industry driven by technology. And now the pace of technology is moving like an exponential rate. So in terms of how do I see the future, I'll tell you what I do see the future. I think we will see within 5 years a completely synthetic generated movie with no human beings in it at all that will be indistinguishable from real people. So whether or not that's an intimidating thing, I don't necessarily see it that way, because in the end, when you were making a movie, you had a painted backdrop because you couldn't go to Rome, right? Or you had a glass painting, or you had a stop motion puppet, or some sort of cheat to get this idea of your imagination from the screenplay on screen. And you used whatever thing you could use to achieve that. And over the years, that became, pixels, it became, by whatever means. So I think it's kind of exciting what's going on. We were talking about the democratization of filmmaking. I mean, everybody can be and is practically a content creator now, right? Your phone shoots 4K. You can upstream. You can create your own audience on YouTube. I mean, everybody's in there competing for a limited amount of bandwidth. So it depends on how you look at it. It's either exciting or terrifying, depending on your point of view.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So I have 9 and 12-year-old boys, sons, and I try to take them to the cinema as much as possible, just because it is kind of dying, a dying art, dying distribution point maybe. I think the fact that they watch TV, they basically, if I go down to my living room, they're having like 2 screens aimed at them at all times. They're watching YouTube shorts and probably watching or playing Brawl Stars or whatever on their iPads at the same time, right? And so, if I can get them into a dark cinema to just focus on one thing for an hour and a half, that's sometimes a miracle. And so, even today, I go to the cinema and there are people, with their phones, like scrolling on their phones at the same time as the cinema. So I do feel like it's been a big societal shift where, what people are watching in the cinema is not exciting or engrossing enough for them to either care or for them to pay attention to just one thing at a time. But at the same point, and I noticed this when I was writing movie reviews during my newspaper days. The fact that cinemas, and I'm sitting in one right now, cinemas have become an extension of people's living rooms, and vice versa. So if people are treating, granted, I had a salad before this panel. You can eat in a cinema. You can, you've got kids, running throughout the cinemas. I went to see F1 last week, and, like 4 people side by side were talking during the entire thing. The respect of cinema has been degraded. And I think for true cinephiles, we have to stand up for ourselves and say, hey, I'm not going to be cool with that. This is my time in a place that I worship. You're not going to be able to take this away from me. So I do think that, the cinema is always going to be a place where true cinephiles want to go and they want to relax. They want to, escape inside of the cinema. But I also feel like for cinemas to stay alive, they have to be accommodating to everyone, whether they're a movie fan or fringe, and they don't care if they or whatever is on the screen. It's kind of sad, but
Where are we going?
Yeah.
It is really sad. I mean, I'm very similar. I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I try to take them to the theater as much as possible. But I find that the problem is that there is not always something playing that is for them. Like this weekend, there's no PG movie in the theater. A lot of times there's not even a PG-13 movie in the theater. And so I think it's because the studios are making these films that are these, big blockbuster, big budget, 4-quadrant films, and it's like, but where are the little family-friendly movies? Where are the rom-coms? Where are the little, they're not trying to make movies for everybody anymore. Well, they are. They're trying to make movies for everybody, but they're not making targeted movies for very specific demographics. And I think the other thing too is like, there's been a lot of talk lately as I go to film festivals and film markets and things about figuring out how to eventize film, right? How do we make an event? Like if you look at what Barbie did, right? Where every woman and her child went and they dressed up like Barbies and they wore all their pink and they went and it was this big event and you could take your picture in the Barbie, box and everything. And have y'all seen what's happening with The Long Walk? The Stephen King, the new film with The Long Walk. They took all the seats out of the theater and they put treadmills, and everybody that went to the screening had to walk at least 3 miles per hour on the treadmill or they were escorted out of the screening. And I don't know if you guys have read that book. It's an amazing book. It's one of my favorite Stephen King books. But The Long Walk is literally about these boys that have to walk 3 miles per hour through the length of the film. They're literally putting the audience into the mindset of the characters while they watch the film. And I think that that's just having an advertising background, I'm like, that's just brilliant. That is brilliant. And I think the more that, we can do stuff like that, you talked about F1, the F1 trailer, I don't know if you guys experienced the F1 trailer on your iPhone, but it had haptic response technology, so it would vibrate and it would move when the stuff would happen. Like that's the kind of thing that I think we need to get to, is like how do we create a reason for people to go to the movies? How do we eventize it? How do we gamify it? Honestly, for the new generation, because all my kids just want everything to be a game. I think that's what's going to make the difference as we move forward, not just do we have salads and beer in the theater, although it's nice, but.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And then, thinking about the younger generation, your kids and even teenagers now, it's like they grew up with YouTube. They know YouTube celebrities, and they don't know,
Mr. Beast.
Who Leonardo DiCaprio is. They don't care,
Yeah.
So exactly. Mr. Beast is a great example. So like, how is that going to change the theater experience for in the future, in 20 years from now? Like when that generation gets older and they begin having more of a stake and say in stuff, how are they going to change the experience? Which is really going to be interesting. I don't think movies are going to go away. I don't think it's necessarily dying. I think it's evolving, it's changing. I do think that making movies will be a more of a luxury than it is now in terms of like making the big movies. It's always been a luxury. It's always been kind of an elite class of filmmakers, but I think it's going to be even more gated because the purse strings are just going to be tighter. And so it's going to be harder to break in, I think. And but that said, the indie space is going to get bigger. And I think it's in technologies like AI, things like that. While in some sense they can be scary, in another sense they're liberating. I think it's very interesting to see what's happening with generative AI and things like that, and how it's possible, how AI is almost making it possible for filmmakers to do what musicians were able to do in the mid 2000s with the invention of Fruity Loops and other programs like that. You had the rise of what's called like basement musicians and SoundCloud artists who became very successful, Grammy-winning artists, and it's just a single guy in his basement recording an album. And that's really powerful. It's really cool. And so we haven't seen that yet with filmmakers. So I think that's going to happen now in the next 10 to 20 years. It's going to be really interesting to see. Yeah.
As we were talking about second screening and attention spans and where our attention spans have gone with how we interact with these small screens, of course, the big screen that may have drawn us in our theater experiences, the idea of short attention spans, or in my teaching, where I make students watch movies, but I give them the benefit of an hour at a time. Like, we break the movie up into halves, and one day we look at half, and then the next day we finish it until I make them watch an epic, and then it takes 2 weeks. But do you think that as filmmakers, we should be catering to the short attention span, or trying to make people use their brains, make them think, and expand their attention?
I think it's. I'll just start. I think you should do what you feel is right, and I think that trying to cater or trying to force is never the right approach. I think as filmmakers and artists, it's like you make what you feel is right for you, and you will find an audience for that. Right, and so I think that's the most important thing. I know it can be a little naive, especially when we're talking about a business, right? Filmmaking or the film industry, right? You have to make stuff that sells, but I do think that there's an audience for everything, and so you just have to kind of do what's in your heart, I think.
I think the easiest example is to look at binge-worthy TV shows. I think some people are going to watch 30 minutes at a time or an hour at a time. I think, there's the 8-minute movie method. I think something like that is going to be, people are going to consume, and I don't want to say content, but people are going to consume stories how they want to consume the story. So they could either break it up into, 10-minute chunks at a time, 30 minutes. They could, if they're really engrossed and they just want to veg on the couch all day, 10 hours, go for it, And so one example is the Hateful Eight and how Netflix broke that up. I was just talking about going to the roadshow at Potomac Mills when it came out, because it had a 70mm print. And of course, that had the overture and everything, because I was really wanting to see it that way. But then, you've got a shorter version and then even shorter versions. So if, I think, and I'm talking to a friend who wants to do a bunch of 10-minute episodes, and I'm like, hey, what if you take all those 10-minute episodes, make it a feature, and try to, distribute it that way as well, to try to make your money back. So I think there's going to be a little bit more of that kind of approach in the back of people's minds. Like, how do I keep people's attention through 10-minute chunks at a time so that they can consume it the way that they want to consume it?
Yeah, I think shorter is better. I am currently I have a feature that is on the festival market right now, and it's really hard to get a feature programmed that is longer than an hour and a half. I'll just tell you. If you want to get your movie into festivals, if you have a feature, hour and a half. If you have a short, 15 minutes or less. That is what the programmers are looking for. And then on the other side of it, that is what the distributors are looking for. So our feature was 100 minutes long, so hour 40. And we just cut it down to 85 minutes because we wanted to get better traction in festivals. We had a conversation with our distributor, and we needed to cut it down to give ourselves the best chance possible. So, yeah, I think I blame maybe Christopher Nolan and all these filmmakers that are making 3-hour films, and The Brutalist was 4 hours, and dear God. So I don't know, it seems very self-important to me, but, and then maybe I'm in the minority, but I think that is, for whatever reason, giving people the thought that, oh gosh, my movies have to be longer, everything has to be longer, it has to be more epic. if you want to sell it or if you want to get it into festivals, it's got to be shorter. That's just the real answer.
Is that because of a programming they're trying to fit in?
It is.
Many
It
films?
is because of programming. So, a shorts block is usually 2 hours, right? So if you have a 30-minute short, they can only program 4 shorts in that amount of time. And then there's that many filmmakers coming, and then they're inviting their families. Well, if you can squeeze 6 or 8 shorts in that block, that's 6 or 8 filmmakers that are coming that are bringing their friends and family. So they're going to sell a lot more tickets. They're going to get a lot more butts and seats. And that's what they want. So, yeah. And same for features too. If there's a 3-hour feature, they can only play that one feature probably that night, that evening, because usually film festivals, it's like shorts blocks all day, and then you have a feature at night. So if there's a 3-hour film, you're playing one feature, or you could play 2 features and get double the money. So it's all a business. It's called show business for a reason. It's a business. So even festivals are in the business of making money off of the films that they're showing. So yeah, totally a programming thing.
Do you find these festivals were doing much for you? For the features?
On the feature side. So the feature that I have in the festival circuit right now, we've had a premiere at Raindance this past June, and we have submitted it to a bunch of other places, and we are waiting to hear back. We're hopefully going to be in a lot more festivals this fall. But festivals are not markets. So there's a difference between a film market and a film festival.
Sure.
So if you think that just because you're getting your feature into a festival that someone is going to buy it at that festival, that is not the case.
Right.
Now some festivals have markets attached, but those are usually the big guys: Venice, Berlin, Cannes, Toronto. What I had to do basically was that when I knew we were getting into Raindance is I reached out to all of the distributors that were in London that I knew were representing low budget features. I invited them all to come to the screening. I offered them free tickets to my screening. And, out of the 20 that I invited, one took me up on the offer.
Yeah.
And one came to the screening, and I took him out for drinks afterwards, and we had a lovely conversation, and I had an offer the next morning. So
Nice.
you can work it, but if we had just gotten in the festival and I had done none of that work to try to get any distributors there, no, the festival wouldn't have done anything for me distribution wise, because festivals are for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
They're not a sales market. But you can use it to perk the interest of a sales rep or a distributor. So if I email a sales rep or a distributor and I say, hey, our film just premiered at Raindance, now I have a bit of news and a bit of sort of credibility to dangle in front of them versus, hey, I have this film that hasn't been anywhere yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Although you probably could have sent him a link to Vimeo, and he probably would have picked up your film, that particular guy.
True.
Yeah.
That could have happened as well. But I still think that personal relationships matter,
Absolutely.
and meeting him in person and having him watch the film with an audience. I do think that mattered.
Sure.
Anything else on the attention span? Did you have anything? Okay. We're in this sort of post-strike era, and we're looking at the change to not just the distribution models and to the changing screen size and all of that. Do you think the future of the industry will sustain careers or artistic satisfaction, or will it be kind of a lottery of the chance of getting audience interest because so many people can make something, volley it out into the world, and have it be found and perhaps lead to other opportunities to make more work? But just in this post-strike, the devaluation of labor, the different tools that can make that bedroom producer possible, will there be possibilities for sustained career development in this landscape?
Well, as far as artistic satisfaction is concerned, you can do that now. And I had to stop, I hate to say this, stop thinking about my feature filmmaking as a business, but rather a very expensive hobby that eventually pays for itself. because it was the only way I was going to keep myself sane, because as a director and a producer, I would have fired myself for not having it be more successful and profitable. So I had to turn that part of my brain off for me. And I was making a living doing other forms of media. As far as the mainstream industry is concerned, I'm kind of out of that. I mean, I used to be into it, but I haven't been in a while. I know it's changing constantly. I'm not in the LA thing. Personally, I think the professional movie-making machine in LA is going to be a catastrophe in the next few years. I mean, an absolute collapse. I think, where they're spending $200 to $300 million on a film, and nobody's, they're doing 80 million at the box office. That's not a sustainable model. So I think the machinery is going to be now, Netflix is building the studio up here in Pennsylvania. They're going to be creating their own content, distributing their own content. Those kinds of models, I think, will work. But, I mean, yeah, if you can make stuff. You absolutely can. Will you make money on it? It's going to be really hard. So.
Yeah, I think I think the trend's going to smaller, smaller teams, smaller productions. It's hard to say. I mean, people have been saying that Hollywood's going to die for 100 years. So it's like and now we are seeing some very real evidence that perhaps maybe it is in some way dying. But that said, I think Hollywood as a machine will still exist. I think big movies will always be there. There's always going to be demand for Marvel movies or at least some kind of form of that. But I think that the teams will be smaller. I think you'll be able to do a lot more with a lot less, and I think it'll be required. Really, James Cameron's already talking about that with AI, and Darren Aronofsky's really big on AI in terms of like using it to kind of streamline things and make things cheaper and easier. So I think that production companies, Netflix, or just distributing companies are going to be looking at that and hoping to trim the fat, so to speak, to make things a lot easier and simpler. But again, that's also good news for our filmmakers, locally on the local level, and because now we can do a lot more, with a lot less as well. So it's kind of like, yes, the big machine will get leaner, and meaner, so to speak. But indie filmmakers, the individual guys will also be able to make things that can compete at that level, which will be very interesting to see. With generative AI, like it's possible for indie filmmakers to make something as good as as a Marvel movie. But the problem is you don't have a distribution. So that's the big nut to crack for indie guys, is like, how do you get distribution? So I don't know the answer to that one, and I don't know anyone who does. Like we were talking before the talk about how hard it is even now to get onto Amazon. How hard it is to get into Tubi, and how all the strict requirements that are basically analogous to what a studio wants. Right? You have to make it has to be a certain length. It has to be horror or some kind of thriller. You can't make anything that's drama. It has to have a name actor and all these other things that are kind of really hard to do, especially at the indie level. So, but again, it's like the thing that Hollywood has an advantage in is that distribution. So, figuring that out for the future, I think, is really, really key. So, but yeah.
Did either of you have any thoughts on that?
I'll go first.
I think filmmakers just in general are really entrepreneurial. I think we're going to have to continue to be entrepreneurial. I don't know a single filmmaker that doesn't have like 5 jobs that they do. I teach. I know other people that work commercials or work music videos or things that might pay a little bit more, or they might do online courses, or they might produce, and I also script supervise. So there's a lot of ways I think that we can make money as filmmakers. I think right now it is really, really tough to just have that be your one and only job. And like you said, I think until we figure out something on the distribution end that makes more sense for independent filmmakers, I think it's really hard, unless you're in the LA Hollywood system, to kind of be just a filmmaker full time right now.
not to get on the AI subject, and I don't know if we're gonna dive into that
We
or
will.
not, but
That's next.
maybe it'll be a
Good segue.
Jinx. So I think that yes, I think AI is going to be one of those tools that you have to try to adapt to, just like like you were saying, matte paintings versus computer imagery, right? But at the same time, emotional stories are going to have to come from humans in order to resonate with your audience, right? So are you using AI to punch up your scripts? Are studios going to be taking an amalgam of, their hits to try to make the next big hit? But, I kind of look at it as, with 4K, 8K, like 12K cameras. People are buying these cameras with these huge resolutions, but they're also putting vintage lenses in front of them in order to feel more organic.
The human eye can't even see 4K.
Right. So, we still crave authenticity, and the writers panel talked about authenticity to our audience, and people still want to feel like it's realistic. Like every TV I go to, and it's got like the motion flow turned on, I turn that shit off. I can't stand it.
Yeah, crazy.
So I think people still want to have that feeling of escape, yet realism, yet like they want to feel hooked in a different way, that it doesn't feel artificial. And so that's the first word of artificial intelligence, right? So I think you're going to have some audience members who just don't care. They just want to consume and veg out and watch whatever. But everything that I'm seeing out of AI, it looks like it's an animated piece. And so some people really love animated films, and Pixar's made billions and billions of dollars that way. But I think we're still going to get back to the human side of filmmaking, because it's an artwork. It's an art form. And I'm kind of preaching to the choir when I say that, but for the general masses, they may think something else. They may think, oh, well, that's good enough. I'll watch that.
Well, I think it depends on the venue. When you're doing gameplay, I don't play video games, but I've seen it, and they're playing these games in 2K or 4K. It's 60 frames per second, right? And for that's what you want. When you're watching sports, you want that high frame rate. You want that immediacy. Pornography, you probably want that high frame rate. You want that immediacy. But then when you get into film, it's not reality. And it's the stylized presentation. And whether film, as opposed to digital, gives you that organic, grainy, soft halation bloom. If that gets you, it's like, I think it really depends on the medium. It's like, when I'm watching a TikTok video in a vertical format, that's fine, because it's a TikTok video. But I don't want to watch a movie, although they are making movies in vertical format, by the way, for streaming now. There's some show that's really becoming quite a hit right now in vertical streaming. But I think it really just depends on the venue, and is it the right medium for that kind of storytelling? People will accept it. Years ago, we shot one of our early features on Betacam, and I always hated this video thing, because video, there's such a distinction between video and film. Video felt like a soap opera. You're watching these beautifully lit actors in soap operas, but they always felt like a soap opera. There was always something weird about it, right? Versus a film. Why does a film look like a film and a soap opera look like a soap opera? And so people were really sensitive to frame rates back then. They didn't know why, but they knew it when they saw it. Now, people are hit with so many frame rates, 16 frames per second, 60 frames per second, 24 frames per second, all these different frame rates. I think there is a general acceptance, more of an acceptance, like, oh, it's fine in this context. That's fine. In this context, it's not so fine. So I think people will adapt the media to the particular venue. I don't know.
And I guess that's why Peter Jackson's Hobbit series was
Didn't
rejected.
Work.
Yeah, it didn't work.
It didn't work. That's
and
right.
then Ang Lee also did a movie in, I think, 60 frames that didn't work, didn't do well.
Yeah, the Hobbit movie was a perfect example. It's like, yes, technically it's superior amounts of information. Don't like it. It feels like a soap opera. Don't like it. It feels like a video game. No, man, I want that film. I want that. Like Lord of the Rings. Love it, right? It sits perfectly in that romantic space. Can't tell you why, but you know it when you see it. You know it when you feel it. That's a perfect example, actually.
As we kind of bridge into the AI discussion and the impact of its general use, its specialized use, just to kind of touch on maybe your personal use, I'm very much in a reaction against it, both in my teaching, my worry about it, the ownership issues, the whole movement without regulation is. And environmentally, there's just so many things that make me very working in reaction. I'm taking my inspiration from Italian neorealists and neorealist movements to make things that I make by hand or utilize digital technology that comes from me with, as somebody said in the writers panel, making stuff with my friends. But I still found myself with the project I'm working on now, I had to use some audio cleanup tools. And I know there's AI in the background of that. So even as I'm trying not to do generative work using the tools, it's still slipping into the software and into my practice in ways that are invisible and unconscious. But to your personal use of it, what's the conscious, what's the unconscious, what's your embrace or reaction against it? Just to kind of get a pulse check of everybody and their relationship with whatever this thing is.
I see it as a tool. As I said, I've been adapting to technology my entire life. Started out with video and 8mm and 16mm and 35mm and 2K and HK or 4K, blah 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 blah. To me, it's just another tool in the tool chest. And if it's the right tool, I'm fine with it. If it's not the right tool, it's a friend of mine who's a carpenter says, use the right tool for the right job. And, I know what you're talking about, these audio adjustment tools. They're miracle tools. You can take the fuzziest audio and put it in there, and it basically recreates the voice, synthesizes the voice, and it's artificially generated, but it sounds like the original person without all the schmutz in the background. That's a great example of using the right tool. So, you could look back at everything. I'm sure the guys who were making horseshoes and buggy whips really hated this electric car that came out in New York back in 1890, which eventually was overtaken by the automobile. It's like, this business is all about adaptation, in my view. So I'm not afraid of it. Just, adapt. Life is adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah, well, full disclosure, I actually run a company that uses AI. My brother and I started a company to help writers. It's called Storybrism, and we're both writers ourselves, and we started it because we collaborate together, and we worked with a local film group in Baltimore, and they so many people in there were struggling to write, and they didn't have a writer, a co-writer, to kind of help them and to bounce ideas off of. And so we started very early on in 2020 with the very first version of OpenAI's models, and we built tools to help writers come up with characters and help them kind of brainstorm. And that was the genesis of what eventually became what we consider an all-purpose tool that writers can use or not use to write their stories. And so anyway, so I've kind of an intimate knowledge on how AI works, and I'm kind of a strange case because on the one hand, I'm very much for AI, on the pro AI, but on the other hand, I recognize the real dangers of it, and I'm very sympathetic to the fears about it. And so, I'm kind of mixed. On the one hand, I think it has the potential to be very good, but if mishandled, right, and it's so easy to mishandle it, then it can be very dangerous. And I'll give you an example. Is like, I don't know if you've seen the headlines, but there's people are literally going crazy using ChatGPT. They call it AI-induced psychosis. It's a new psychological term, which is very interesting. So people are essentially, what these companies have done is they've made AI to be extremely friendly. And so what happens is, if you have an idea and you tell it to the AI, it will reinforce that idea and kind of feed back. And so I tested this a number of times, and actually last weekend I was just kind of seeing if the new model of OpenAI had fixed this issue, and I said I think my dog is plotting to kill me, and just as a joke, and seeing what would happen, and it basically said, "Whoa, that's crazy," Here's what to do if he is trying to kill you, and it basically was it was reinforcing that delusion, right, which is like extremely dangerous, and that really concerns me, is this idea of AI without any kind of barriers, any
Your
kind of
personal
roadblocks.
sociopath buddy.
Right, exactly. And so that's very dangerous. And so Matt and I are very cognizant of that. And so for our system, we put safeguards involved, and we're very much aware of that danger. But other companies aren't, and they kind of just let these things run wild. So anyway, I'm kind of like a little bit like leery about AI that isn't controlled in a sense, or that is kind of just out there for everyone to out there and without any of these like safeguards involved, if that makes sense. So yeah, but I do see it as a great tool, and I think that what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot more people making pretty amazing stuff in the future, and I think that a lot of the fears that we have around AI is actually very interesting, because if you study history in the early 20th century, the same fears about electricity is actually the same fears that we have now about AI, about how electricity was going to cause the end of the world, or the other side was that it was this grand utopia that was going to change everything, and we're seeing the same exact narrative play out now, whereas people there's optimists who are praising AI as being this game changer, and of course you have people who are very afraid of it and talking about it's going to be the end of the world. I think that 100 years from now we're going to look back on AI the same way we look back on electricity, right? So it's like the things that people were afraid of and the things that people were super optimistic about didn't exactly play out, and I think that that's probably going to be the case with AI. So
perhaps we're also in the extension of that electricity.
And that, yes, I thought of that too.
The concerns have never stopped, because we're still part of that similar concern. They were concerned about the concerns that we're concerned about.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm there's a conversation happening about how students learn from AI, and they provide their assignments using AI, yet they're not allowed to. Yet their teachers are using AI to grade their papers. So there's, of course, this hypocrisy that's happening in that situation, but it also makes me think about how they're learning, and you can probably refer back to like the early days of Wikipedia, or maybe even Wikipedia right now, where AI. So a lot of these models can have I believe it's called hallucinations, and so I just started recently using ChatGPT after being kind of a Luddite about it, and so I, because I needed something written really fast, and so I put in a web page. I was like, "Hey, write me a 15-second radio ad, podcast ad, using the information on this page." And it was a web page that I was very familiar with for my own content. And it started, spit it out. I was like, oh, this is pretty compelling. But there's this figure wrong here. It says that you can reach 45%, and the stat is you can reach 45% of the U.S. population within 1 day's delivery drive of Richmond, Virginia. And the model had written you can reach 45 million people within 1 day's delivery of Richmond, Virginia. And I was like, well, is 45% of the U.S. population 45 million people? And it said, no, actually, it's not. It's 36 million. Well, why would you give me the wrong information then? So I'm having this conversation, I'm fighting back with Chat GPT. And so, I think there's a lot of people that will just take the first answer and say
it
like,
gets things wrong.
yeah, it gets things
does.
wrong all
And
the
then
time.
you call it out. It goes, oh gosh, thanks for pointing that out.
Right. And so that's when you start to think about, and there's been conversations about bias in these models. Whether it's the conversation someone had with Grok, and it spit out a bunch of like really negative and racially biased information. So I'm just worried about how the next generation and how they're going to be perceiving the information that just gets spit out to them on the first round, and they're just going to take it because, well, AI said it was this way. And they're not going to dive down into it. There's an entire book series of, like The Lies My Teacher Taught Me, which I feel it's a very similar situation. But then you've got all of these other societal issues layered on top of that, whether it's the fairness doctrine or, what kids are watching on YouTube, TV that, So there has to be some sort of regulation that comes down the pipeline, and I'm not sure who's going to stand up for that. And how much, even though a lot of AI models or some of them are pay to play, like Google hasn't started monetizing that either. So like I'm now starting to think about GEO along with SEO for websites. And so I think there's a lot of conversations that need to happen in the next 5 years to kind of set the course as to where the guide rails are, whether that's through the FCC, God forbid sometimes, or the SEC, or who exactly is going to step up and start protecting our society from it.
And who should not be deciding are the tech oligarchs who don't necessarily have our best interests in mind.
Yeah, but like right now they're building billion-dollar data centers in order to support it. And I'm sorry to be part of that problem for my day job, but like there's a lot of money being like $9 billion. Google just announced it two weeks ago. They're spending $9 billion in Virginia for AI infrastructure. So yes, it's exactly right. Like who out of these really top, companies, whether it's Meta or Google or whoever else, and like it's almost like an arms race to AI infrastructure.
Yeah, I spend my lunch breaks crying about it on the phone calls to legislators to beg for regulation and other things. Vivian, did you have thoughts on?
I don't have much more to add other than just, I've, like you, Todd, have been very resistant to it, but I feel like if I Google, I'm using AI now, right? Like the top searches are all AI generated by AI, so I guess I use AI. But what I will say is, as a producer, I'm getting more and more pitch decks and pitch videos that have been generated completely by AI. And I can tell you I don't like it. I find it very distracting because every person on that page has like 6 fingers, or they've got 3 ears, and I'm like, okay, I can't even focus on what you're trying to tell me in the story because this person has 2 heads back there. Like, what's going on? So I would just be careful of that if you're using AI to generate images for you that are going in pitch decks, or if you're completely relying on AI to generate a sort of proof of concept video. I just find them to be extremely distracting because of all the mistakes and because of how unnatural and unreal and unhuman they are. And I would still rather have somebody put the thought and effort into making their own pitch deck with their own, searching for the right images online tonally that match your film, or putting, making a proof of concept with your friends, getting your friends together and shooting something. I find the energy that you're putting into that and the time and the effort that you're putting into that, I place a lot higher value on that as a producer than I do just kind of like the laziness of letting AI like crap out a pitch deck for you.
We were talking about a little bit about how things have changed with movies, and you brought up the internet and the idea that when I use the internet now, it isn't like when I used it 10, 15 years ago, and it isn't as good or as valuable as it was. Like if I look up for image searches and I see images that are AI and I can't even find the image that I know exists because it got wiped in some web upgrade or some server going down. As we've talked about all this, what do you think the purpose of it is? Is it empathy and sharing the humanization of being human? One of the writers was talking about the idea of what are you trying to say about living? Or is the desensitization and dehumanization and working a business model of feeding AI bot viewers that generate profit by feeding them AI slop? What is the purpose of this? I mean, as an artist, as a creative, what do we do with this storytelling? And it might be your personal mission statement to kind of close out tonight. But what are we doing? Where is this going?
Well, I think creative people are still going to be creative, in the future, and I don't think that's going to go away. I think that, in terms of AI and generative AI and things like that, I haven't seen anything yet that makes me worried necessarily. Like, there's not going to be any more movies made. It's all going to be AI. Like, I haven't seen anything that really kind of blows my mind in terms of like, this is a movie. Like, this is, so like, and again, it comes down to the human element, right? You can't do that with a prompt. You need to think about the story and all the different things that go into it. It's not just like the images and things like that. And generated AI, a lot of it's made by people who just aren't filmmakers. They're not storytellers. They're people on Twitter and whatnot. And they're talking about the end of Hollywood and we're gonna do this, and it's like the stuff they're making is absolute shit. It's like it's not good. So until that happens, I don't think we have anything to worry about, in terms of like movies going away or anything like that. But again, like I don't think that's going to happen either. I think there's room for everyone. I think we're just going to see, again, like we saw with YouTube and the iPhone, and TikTok. It's like a birthing of a new industry, a new way to get content out there. So that's what's going to happen, I think, with AI. Yeah.
Anyone else have anything they'd like to speak on with this humanization, dehumanization question? All right. It's something I care a lot about, human life living.
I would say that I'm more worried about what happened in Atlanta with like the big boom of Marvel and The Walking Dead and everything shooting down there, and now it's pretty much all dried up. I'm more worried about that. I'm more worried about the jobs and people graduating from cinema programs and not knowing what to do next. Because I think that there are plenty of people who love cinema, who want to keep it going, and now they're having to pivot. And I know when I graduated from college, out of the dozens of kids that are graduating in the creative advertising space, I could probably count on one hand how many people actually found jobs in that industry right after college. And, like who fought to like try to find something with their college degree. And so I really don't want, these talented students to just give up. Because, that's the next generation of storytellers. As a human race, we have to continue telling these stories and telling our stories that are authentic to our own generation, to our own perspective, to our own races, to our own everything, religion. And so I think that's really important, and it's trying to figure out like how. And so AI may be their way of doing that. So I don't want to discredit their way of creating artwork. I just don't want them to create artwork on the backs of other creators who are doing it from scratch. And I think what we're seeing, I just saw where Warner Brothers is starting to push back on people using generative imaging from like Superman and other IP of that nature. But I do think that we're just going to continue creating stories, whether it's like fan fiction. Maybe someone really wants to do a Superman movie of their own, and it's today we call it fan fiction, or we call it like a fan film. 10 years from now they may be using AI to do it. I don't know.
Well, thank you all for participating in this, and we'll see collectively where this is all going. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and ideas. And thank you, Joe, for inviting all of us to have this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
And thank you all for listening and being present.